Judy Perlman, your host, and we have a really interesting show tonight. My guest is Beth Dugan. She's on the faculty at UMass Boston in the gerontology department. In fact, she's the director of the global aging department. And if you actually visited us on our Facebook page, you will see that the topic for tonight is, should you still be driving? Which is a crucial question. There's a lot of information to unpack, and there's also sort of the emotional component of how do you raise this question, whether you're the driver yourself or whether you're a family member. So we're going to talk for a couple of minutes with Beth, sort of laying out some groundwork, but then we're going to do something really cool and fun. We're going to do a call-in. So I'll put the number up now. We'll probably be able to see it and deal with it when you call, but give us a couple of minutes to just lay out some of the big issues. So welcome, Beth. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Judy.
Yeah.
I'm happy to be here.
Really excited about it. So, the first question is, how unsafe are older drivers?
That's a great question. Older drivers, for the most part, are very safe. They have some of the best rates in terms of wearing seat belts. They're rarely ticketed for speeding or DUI. They tend to self-regulate and not get themselves in risky situations. So in a lot of metrics, older drivers are among the safest on the road. But where they get into trouble is that when they're involved in a crash, their risk for a serious injury or fatality is 9 times higher than younger drivers. And so, and we think that poor outcome is due to the increased fragility that people have as they age, and then also the type of crashes that older drivers typically are involved in.
That's really, we talked a little bit about that, and I actually want to come back to that because I learned a lot just talking about that. But I just really want to ask another basic question. Is there one age when people should stop driving?
That's another good one. People always want to know at what age should my mother stop driving, or is there some age that we should require people to give up the keys? And around the world, different countries have tried that. They had forced people to cease driving at 70 or 75. But the fact is, people age in vastly different rates, thanks to genetics, healthcare practices, health behaviors, and other factors. So when you see one 75-year-old, you've seen one 75-year-old. It's we're all different, which makes it very difficult in terms of policy. It would be easier if we all fell apart at the same age, and then we could make a rule that all people have to stop driving at that age. But there are some 90 and centenarians who are in better shape than people in their 50s or 60s. So it's not age, but the person's physical and mental function. Mm-hmm. Basically, how well a person can see, think, and move determines their driving fitness.
Mm-hmm. Well, that actually brings up a really interesting question. Are there other ages that it's really the safety of driving is a question?
Yeah, that's a good point, because the older drivers tend to get a lot of press, but if you look at the statistics, it's almost a nice U-shaped distribution. And so you see drivers at the youngest, the junior operators have very high rates, and then it goes down during middle age and then comes back up in late life. So you see at the start and end of someone's driving career, their risk for crash and poor outcomes is highest.
So yeah, that certainly makes sense. As the mother of 2 drivers, and the way we went back and forth to school was through 2 incredibly scary merges, and it was amazing. Mm. So young drivers, they have a lot of challenges too.
They do.
Yeah. And I also just want to say that part of the reason that we're having this conversation is my own mother is 97 years old. Hi, Bernice. Sometimes she watches this. And I remember a pretty difficult conversation with me and my brothers, and beginning a conversation with my mother about whether it was time for her to give up the keys. And as it happened, she had a not very terrible injury, but she dislocated her shoulder rather badly. Mm. But that kind of set in motion a number of things that brought caregivers into the house. And amazingly, at the right time, she found out that in order to replace her car, to repair her car, it was going to cost $7,000.
Wow.
And so she said, okay, well, this may be just the moment.
Yeah.
So I think we dodged a bullet that a lot of people have not dodged.
Sure.
So I would invite at this point, if you are out there and you have questions about yourself as a driver, or you have a family member that you're questioning, feel free to dial us up and I'm sure we can use the technology. And meanwhile, we'll keep talking about what we've learned. So one of the things that you told me about were some of the risk factors. And so tell us about left turns, Beth.
Sure. So the type of crashes that older drivers tend to have will be making a left-hand turn. And that's difficult because we have to, you just think about the last left turn you made when you were driving. You have to judge the distance of the oncoming traffic, and you have to evaluate the speed of the oncoming vehicles. And then you make a decision about whether you can make the turn or not. And as we get older and our eyes change and get a little less efficient, it gets more difficult to do that accurately. And so left-hand turns are particularly bad for older drivers and can lead to side impact crashes that are really deadly. With younger operators, you can see speed or substance use may contribute to a crash that happens. With an older driver, it's not so much those factors, but it's almost always left-hand turn leading to really bad outcomes.
So we will talk more a little bit later in the show about some of the other solutions, but when we were talking about this left-hand turn thing, you were like, well, one thing you can do is plan out your route, either yourself or with somebody else, basically to avoid left-hand turns, or really to only have left-hand turns where there's a directional arrow that says now it's your turn and everyone else is going to stop.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are the best. If you have, and I think the term is protected left-hand turn, and that's where you have a signal to help get you through the intersection safely. And so you route plan so that you know where your destination is and where you're starting from, and you try to minimize or avoid the left turns that don't have that protected arrow. And so you can take a bunch of right turns, and that will get you where you're trying to go.
I live on a one-way street that ends at a one-way street, so I know. Yeah, you can do it. You can actually just take a bunch of turns and get back to where you wanted to go, which is like a little bit behind you.
Right.
But so it goes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see, what else did we talk about? Oh, we also talked about some of the specific health factors and risk factors that, as Beth said at the beginning, there's no hard and fast rule about the age that people should stop driving, but there are some other health conditions that are really important to pay attention to. So
right.
Talk us through that,
So
please.
when family members ask me how can I know if my parent is safe to drive, or a spouse wants to know, is my spouse safe to drive, or I'm concerned, things that, the simplest way I can try to help people to remember is to think the critical driving skills. You need to be able to think because we're processing a ton of information as we're driving. So how's the person's thinking? Are they taking medications that may make them drowsy or make them a little slow in terms of their cognition? That would be something I would be worried about. Then we have to see. Lots of the information that we take in while we're driving is visual information. So we've got to be able to see accurately, not just in front of us, but peripheral vision is very important. Is there a pedestrian in that crosswalk? Is there a car who's trying to merge? Is there some other risk or danger that I should look out for? So see, think, and move. And then this is where your mother encountered her challenge was the shoulder impaired her ability to move. And so sometimes it's an injury after a fall like that. Other times it can be arthritis or some other Parkinson's can impact driving fitness as well. So can the person physically make all the moves and maneuvers that are required to operate the vehicle? And sometimes that's as much as having a stiff neck and you can't see behind you, or it's difficult to get in the car or to get out of the car. And there are some fixes. Now I've had people tell me, well, it's difficult for me to get into the car, but what we did is we put a silk scarf on the bottom or a garbage bag to make the seat a little more slippery, and the person can slide right
in and out. That's cool.
And so people are, very, ingenious, I think, and come up with solutions when they know what the problem is.
But also one of the very serious things you talked about was dementia, that is a real red line. So maybe take us through that a little bit.
Sure. So see, think, and move, those are the three critical functions, and thinking might be the biggest threat to driving fitness. I like to say, you may be healthy enough to be driving until the day you until the day you die, happily in your sleep or something. But for some of us, that won't be the case. We'll have cognitive impairment or diagnosed dementia of some type, and Alzheimer's disease, of course, is the most common dementia. And what that does is it interferes with our ability to process information, and depending on where in the brain the disease is progressing, our ability to make decisions or to remember our route or even the basic rules of the road. Now, we have some advantages because most people learn to drive when they're young, and so it's a lifelong skill that's really deeply embedded in our brain. And so we can have sometimes a window. A small study in Missouri found that people with Alzheimer's disease could drive after the diagnosis for a period of a little more than 2 years. And that was with, they all had caregivers and regular checkups with a neurologist, but so there was some window. But the endpoint is certain. If there's a dementia that's diagnosed, the person will almost certainly have to cease driving.
Yeah. Makes a lot of sense for their safety and everyone else's.
Exactly.
Yeah. I do remember my mother, before she drove, basically, before she stopped driving, basically saying, I know everywhere I'm going. I know how to get to CVS. I know how to, there's no big, mystery here. And I think that's what you're saying is both we know that place and we do have these ancient memories.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you can keep driving and find your place. And it's, the life space tends to get smaller as we get older, and so there are just those places that are closer to home that the person's going to.
Yeah.
But yeah, I always like to emphasize that people are very resilient, and someone who has to cease driving, it's not the worst thing that they've encountered in their life. You just don't survive to late life without having experienced a lot of challenges. And so the nice thing about growing older is we have all that experience and all those coping skills that we can draw on. And so it's a setback, and we don't have enough good alternatives in place yet. So it is a hardship. I'm not trying to minimize that it's a hardship, but the person isn't going to break in half or die because they can't drive. It's just one more thing that they will have faced in their life and will have to adjust to. So that's a great moment to say this is Meet the Problem Solvers. I'm Judy Perlman. This is Beth Dugan, who is actually pretty much a national expert on issues of older drivers, helping us explore the question of should you still be driving. We do invite you to call in. We don't think anyone's called in yet, but hopefully people will if you want to. And this is often where we kind of pivot in the show from what is the problem, what are the issues, to what are some of the solutions. And so so I think you just laid out a really important piece, which is this is not, and actually, you know what? Here is Beth's book. It's called The Driving Dilemma. I can tell you that the reviews are wonderful. I did not get a chance to read the whole thing, but it looks like it's very actionable. Right. And what more do you want to say about it? Anything else? Yeah, no, I tried to write a very practical book that would be helpful if you were an older person trying to figure out if you were safe to drive or if you were worried about an older loved one. It would help either audience figure out what to do and how to make the decisions that will keep you as mobile as possible for as long as possible, and yet also as safe as possible too.
So it's the driving dilemma. When you're starting to do your research and think about it, it seems to me that this is a great starting point.
Great.
But so as Beth started sort of pushing us into the notion of change and of making that change, and the term she uses is retiring. How do you say it? Retiring as a driver?
Driving retirement.
Driving retirement. Mm-hmm. So I can tell you that's a pretty hot topic. Mm-hmm. Some people are probably ready to have that conversation. I can tell you of a few people who are not that ready to have that conversation. Yeah. So maybe we can talk a little bit about how to have that conversation, but also what are some of the options in case you do actually, as you do walk down the road of having the conversation, what are some of the ways? Oh, wait, we have a caller. Let's see what happens.
And you're starting to do your research and think about it. It seems
Hello?
to me that
Hello?
this is a good step.
Somebody on the phone?
So I've just started sort of pushing us into the notion of making that. And,
Okay.
the term she used is retiring. How do you say retiring as a driver?
This is just us talking. This is us
So
on the
I
direct. I'm going to try it.
Okay.
I hung up on whoever that was because it didn't seem to work right. If you would like to call back, please do call back and we'll hope that it works better. But until that happens, I sort of asked you like 2.5 questions, so
Right.
you want to grab on one of them?
Yeah,
Let's
so
see. Yeah.
let's see. Let me identify a couple things. I always think if I wash out as being a professor, I could start a business where I tell older people to stop driving for their family members, because
Yeah.
I've had a lot of
Yeah.
friends and colleagues ask me to do that for them. And it's particularly difficult for people who don't live in the same town as their older loved one, and so they don't ride with the person that often, and they just have this sort of anxiety about the situation, especially if there's something in the news. And so if you're not in the same place, what I recommend is when you're together, maybe for Thanksgiving or for some other holiday, is take a walk around the car. And are there dents and scratches and a mirror off and that kind of thing? And take a look and see, because that would be a signal that something's not working.
Great. Okay, we have a call. Let's see if this one works better. Hello, this is Meet the Problem Solvers.
Yes, hi. I have a comment and a question.
Great.
Great, we can hear you, so let it rip.
Hello.
Hello, go ahead. We can hear you. Can you hear us?
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Great.
I'm an older driver, and I've been driving since I was 16. And I've noticed one of the things that happens for me when I'm driving now is I don't have problems with my reflexes. I don't seem to have problems with anything to do with my vision. But there's a phenomenon I want to call clutter. When I was younger, and I'd be driving with a lot of distractions, a lot of traffic, horns, all that stuff, it was easy for me to discriminate between what was important and what wasn't. And I noticed that as I've gotten older, everything is important. And I wonder if you might comment on that. It's not my thinking exactly. It's how my brain works.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks. That's a great question.
I think we're going to hang up so we don't get. Or did you have a comment you also wanted to make?
I would.
Or should we just? Yeah, I'm going to hang up on you because we're getting feedback. Thank you.
Okay, that's a great question, talking about the difficulty in managing lots of stimuli. And I think of it as the cognitive load that your brain is handling. And it's interesting, I've seen that in my own driving. I used to love to drive with the radio blasting, and
right.
I'd have friends, we'd be talking all the time. Now I drive by myself most of the time. And if I have a difficult place that I'm navigating, I turn the radio off because I want to have 100% focus on what I'm doing. And so I empathize with the caller's recognition of that. And I would, just encourage you, if you can find ways to try and minimize the distractions, if it's the radio, if it's something else, turn your phone off, turn off, the things that are, that you can control, and see if that makes it any better. And if it's still that clutter, maybe talk to your primary care physician about it. There may be a quick screening test that he or she could give you that would give you some insight into this new way that your brain is operating. But thank you for your call.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. So let's go back to those agonized children with either their faraway parents or their around the corner parents.
So the checking the car for dents, scrapes, and evidence of mishaps is a good thing to do. Another thing is to ask the older driver, how do they feel? Do they feel more anxious or more stressed when they're driving? Mm-hmm. Is it as pleasurable as it had been historically? because as we're struggling to meet the demands for the driving, the stress would increase for someone who's struggling. And then if that signals a problem, if there's evidence on the car that there's a problem, maybe a sibling is concerned or something, then you can start talking about, well, how do you want us to handle when you can't drive, or how will you know when you're no longer safe to drive, and open this dialogue with the older driver. And sometimes it goes well. Every family is different, and some people thrive on conversations like that, and some don't discuss anything ever, or it's a family that thrives with conflict. So I recognize every situation is different, but what can be a nice neutral party is these multidisciplinary driving evaluation clinics, and that's where you take it out of the family realm and you go to experts. And so I know Beth Dugan used to have, or I believe still has, the DriveWise clinic. Spalding Rehab has them, and the Mass RMV Medical Affairs Division has a statewide list of these clinics that someone could go to. And the nice thing about the clinic is that there's a neurologist does a cognitive workup, ophthalmologist checks the person's vision, and an occupational therapist will check the person's reflexes and also go on a ride with the person and evaluate their performance. And so at the end of that, you have the best information, and it's current, real-time, practical driving.
And it's evidence-based.
Yeah.
Right. This is a neurologist saying, this is not my overwrought daughter trying to make a mountain out of a molehill. This is the doctor saying.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
It's the best scenario.
Yeah.
Now, the drawbacks are, why doesn't everyone do this? Number one, it's not covered by Medicare, so it can be an out-of-cost expense. And at you're asking someone to take this evaluation, and at the end of it, they may learn that they're really not safe to drive, and that the clinicians may report them to the RMV or
Actually,
DMV and
say you
take the license. It's can be expensive and emotionally fraught and high risk. So I understand why people don't do it, but for me, I would want the best data to make the decision, because it's like, you work your whole life and hopefully you are able to leave something for your family. You'd hate to cause an accident and then lose it all for a lawsuit for something that could have been prevented for small money. So,
and as we talked before, if that sort of multidisciplinary team and the out-of-pocket cost is really high, there's kind of a cheaper version, which is to find an occupational therapist with a driving rehab certification, and that person can actually can do also some of this. And also, as Beth said to me before the show, there are accommodations. I mean, her clever one of putting down a silk scarf or a garbage bag to make it easier to slide in and out. There are also things you can put on pedals and lay on us a couple of those now.
Yeah, well, it's great. And again, by engaging with the clinic or the occupational therapist who's certified in driving rehab, you're dealing with experts, and this is their profession. And so if you have problems, stiffness with neck, almost everyone has arthritis at a certain point, some stiffness, so you can add extra mirrors to help you see in the behind you, extra side mirrors. We tend to shrink as we get older, our bones lose mass, and so the car that fit us 10 years ago may not fit us now.
You go all the way up and you still can't reach.
Yeah. Right. So there are pedal extenders or ways to adjust the seat so that the car fits you, so that you have the optimal chance to drive safely, having the vehicle fit your current skills and abilities.
So this is Meet the Problem Solvers. I'm Judy Perlman. This is Beth Dugan, gerontologist and gerontology expert from UMass Boston, talking with us about older drivers. We were talking about also a little bit about the solutions that may not be perfect, but there are things like the ride and other public resources that you can call on, and you can get, we have Lyft and Uber, which are now pretty lower in cost than taxis. Not that there's a lot of issues there of undercutting the taxi industry. I'm sorry, but that's a whole other show. But I mean, I think when you're an adult child concerned about your parent, you have to also be willing to say, not just like, no, you mustn't, but here are some other alternatives. And that might be, we'll find someone in the neighborhood who we can call the day before, and you can plan to go shopping with that person. There may be some things that family members can actually come up with.
Right. Once the taboo is sort of taken off the issue and the family can start to problem solve together, then it gets, there is no limit to the creativity that families can engage in. And it can.
Right, and that was another thing that we talked about, was that somehow the driving issue can be such a hot button issue that you don't go near it, even though you may be talking about all these other things about, do you want to move to one floor, or would it even make sense to move someplace else that's on one floor, or what other accommodations are we collectively thinking about as a family to make sure that you're safe and happy and doing well as an adult. That if you can bring in, and how are we going to, let's talk early on, some older drivers actually need to stop driving. Right. So let's talk about that along with these other issues. Sort of normalize it rather than making it this other thing that you can't talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see it as a normal part of the advanced care planning document that, it's like, do this with my money, do this with the house, do this with my, whatever. And when you think I can't drive, personally, I would want one of the multidisciplinary assessments. So if it were possible to rehabilitation or to add some adaptation, I could keep driving. But if not, and there are options, but it's like you have to destigmatize the issue to get people thinking about it and accessing the things in their community.
Yep. Okay. Well, this is Meet the Problem Solvers. Thank you so much, Beth.